Gosh, it's hard to imagine the Ohio State Buckeyes any hotter than they are right now on the recruiting trail. The reality is this happens somewhat frequently, but it's still not something you should necessarily get used to. Brian Hartline strikes again. Mylan Graham is coming to Columbus. Just the latest in a long line now of really high-end commitments the Buckeyes have brought in on the offensive side of the ball. John Garcia is here to talk to us all about it. We're going to break it down next on Buckeye Breakdown.
We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All-Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. It's been a little while. Glad to be back with you. I'm Brendan Gulick alongside John Garcia Jr., our recruiting expert here on BuckeyesNow. Very well plugged in across the country. He's been with SI All-American for a long time. You know him. You've seen him for a while. He's been on our pod several times before and now an integral part of our Ohio State coverage. And, John, there's big news yesterday because, once again, the Buckeyes have landed another big commitment in Mylan Graham. And the reality is it sort of strikes a different chord, I think, in both ways. One, another five-star kid that Brian Hartline has brought in that, frankly, I think fans can be really excited about. But once again, here we are, in the heart of spring ball, right? We're a week and a half away from the spring game, and this class is really coming together nicely.
100%, BG. And you're starting to expect these blue-chip receivers all the time at Ohio State. But we're not used to seeing this one class stacked on the next. Typically in recruiting, there's almost a compensation for, hey, you grab a five-star or a great group like Ohio State signed in 2023, you expect a downshift, whether it's from a volume or from a talent perspective, sometimes both. And this is not exclusive to every program. This is everyone, top to bottom. Georgia, Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, USC, Texas, whatever it is, you expect a bit of a drop-off because, hey, this group sees the last group and says, hey, maybe there's not a path to playing time. But here comes Brian Hartline. All you have already on board is the number one receiver in the country unanimously in Jeremiah Smith. And, oh, by the way, now Mylan Graham, who's in the top 5 across the board, who could maybe end up as the number 2 when all is said and done. He jumps on board. So I think it's amazing. The expectations are sky high, and yet it is still being exceeded. But I think this says a lot about the type of kid that is willing to come to Columbus because all of these recruits are very familiar with one another. They're playing the same position, but they do know at Ohio State, one, the best players will play, and the most competitive have to have that in their DNA beyond any stars, any stats, any production, because obviously there's so much talent at one spot there that it's just remarkable to see how much it continues to stack up. But once again, we're talking about the best position group for Ohio State is kind of automatically now shifted once again to the wide receiver spot. Because if Mylan Graham is your number 2, I think it's about as an embarrassment of riches as any recruiting position in this class of 2024 has been built anywhere across the country. So this is again, you're floored. You're floored by the consistency, the depth, and the volume all of a sudden of the wide receiver talent headed to Columbus because Graham can absolutely go. Jeremiah Smith is that classic wide receiver, 6'3", 200 pounds, can do everything. Graham is a little bit more twitched up. You can get it to him deep. You could throw him the ball short and allow him to work thereafter. Excellent instincts and burst after the catch. Great in the return game as well. So you start to look at these guys together and think they actually complement one another. Both very polished route runners, both over 6'1" with great length, range, and ball skills. Just a lot of traits that we're becoming accustomed to when we talk about Ohio State wide receivers. And it just looks like it's the start of another very special group.
I think one of the things that most impresses me about Coach Hartline is that he's not necessarily recruiting the exact same mold, the exact same prototype kid. And you could see it on the roster even just a couple years ago. Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith and Jigba were very different, physically built. And yet the Buckeyes find ways to maximize yes, the really high-end skill sets for those two players, but they find ways to put those guys in the right positions. And obviously, it helps when you have a good quarterback. It helps when you have, an offense that can click the way Ryan Day has gotten this offense to click over the course of now multiple quarterbacks. And yeah, look, we don't yet know who's going to be the starting quarterback. Will it be Kyle McCord? Will it be Devin Brown? I'd be pretty surprised if it was somebody other than those two. But the reality is these guys are going to come in and have Marvin Harrison Jr., who, frankly, I think right now would be a top 5 pick in the draft, ready to go. Yeah. You've got legit talent on this year's roster, and both of those quarterbacks you would think would be multi-year starting quarterbacks. And so you start projecting forward, and it just keeps on, the cycle keeps on turning. I almost feel like this is the kind of thing that you dream about, but you never really wonder if you can actually achieve. I mean, there are not many places in America that have these kinds of offensive weapons over and over and over and over again. I just hope that we don't get too used to it, because it really is unbelievable to me.
Yeah, look, Buckeye Nation, if you're listening or watching here on YouTube, enjoy it. Just enjoy it, because in the transfer portal era, in the ever fluid current era of college football portal or otherwise, even in just recruiting, this doesn't happen. Again, this isn't happening really, I would say, anywhere. USC's not doing this, even with a reigning Heisman Trophy winner. Georgia's not doing this with 2 rings in the last 2 years. Alabama's not doing this at this position this consistently. And it's not just Midwest guys like Mylan Graham. Jeremiah Smith is from South Florida. You dipped into IMG Academy last year. Brandon Ennis, another South Floridian. Noah Rogers from North Carolina. I mean, this is from all over the place. Of course, the state of Texas always has something to say relative to Ohio State recruiting. So enjoy it while you got it, because it's atypical of college football. And again, especially this day and age. I think we got a taste of it a couple of years ago. The stacked receiver room, Jameson Williams departs, and everything's kind of okay for everyone. We could see something like that going forward, but you have to have immense talent for that process to even become a possibility. And at wide receiver, yeah, Ohio State is going to have several 5 stars on the bench over the next couple of seasons, and that's just not something, especially at wide receiver, that we typically say, because as you know, BG, that's one of the positions that as a true freshman, you can make an impact in a hurry. It's one that has been tailor-made for instant impact at Ohio State and everywhere else, because you can create a package. You can kind of ease a player into a specific role, especially in the spread era of offensive football. But yet and still, even with that and a rotation on top of it, Ohio State's going to have some 5 stars on the bench at wide receiver. And that's just, again, that's not something we're going to see anywhere else really in the country, especially relative to Ohio State from a volume and consistency perspective.
Look, the best guys are going to get on the field, and at Ohio State, you can make an impact immediately. If you're not the best guy in the room at your position, you can make an impact on special teams, and guys will regularly get on the field on special teams before they actually see the field on offense or on defense. So perhaps we'll see, one of these 5-star kids somewhere along the way getting opportunities to return kicks or punts or something of that nature.
Or go block them like Chris Olave, right?
Yeah, exactly. I want to turn the attention just for a second to the running back room. We like to call our recruiting podcast Building the Buckeyes, so I don't want to be too wide receiver heavy here. You've got Dallin Hayden, who showed a lot of promise last year. Trey Henderson is obviously back again, and when he's been healthy, he's been really, really good. Hopefully he can get to full health this offseason and really showcase what he can do. Looking forward to seeing what we're going to get from Evan Pryor this year after he comes back from an injury that kept him out all of last season. I transition here into the newest Ohio State running back commit in James Peoples, and just kind of pose the question to you point blank. Where do you think he stacks up when I reference those other names when they were obviously big names coming in?
Yeah, it feels like the receiver conversation. You're like, wow, a lot of talent there. But look, Peoples obviously still has another year of high school ball to go here this fall. So maybe a couple of those names won't be around, especially if Henderson has the kind of year with health that we would expect him to have. I could see potential movement there. But look, Peoples is no slouch. 2,000 yards last year in the state of Texas. Speaking of the Buckeyes from that state, just a super productive back, 6 foot, right around 200 pounds. But he's a track guy on top of it. And what I love about him is that he's a hurdler and a long jumper. So, yeah, he can run. And you watch the tape and look, he's pulling away from secondary players on routine. But when you're a hurdler, it brings a different level of contact balance, coordination, and cadence that really makes you calculated as a running back. And I love that element of James's game. It keeps his knees high in an upright running style that does fit a lot of the spread elements of the position. And maybe my favorite trait about him, Brendan, is he really gets to top speed in a hurry. So he's known for speed, and he gets there by the time he's at the hole. And he comes from a spread system there in San Antonio as well. So the familiarity in that transition, I think, will help him potentially bridge the gap sooner than most at the position. So regardless of what that rotation looks like, I think there's a spot for James Peoples down the line. And he's also very comfortable out of the backfield as a receiver. So a very modern, space-heavy, pass catch friendly type of running back with production and size to his name there as well. So we think this Buckeye running back class will probably grow. I think the plan is to take more than one running back in this class of 2024. But if your starting point is James Peoples, a blue chip that you pulled away from the Texas Longhorns, who very much wanted him in the class among many other programs, SEC and beyond, that's a heck of a starting point. And yeah, you expect that type of prospect to navigate north to Columbus and make an impact sooner rather than later, like all of the running backs that you just mentioned.
We've obviously talked James Peoples, Jeremiah Smith, and obviously Mylan Graham. The other guy that has committed to play in the All-American Bowl that is a current Ohio State commit is one of the top offensive linemen in the country, maybe the top offensive lineman in the country in Ian Moore. But he's not the only offensive lineman that the Buckeyes have signed so far. Within the last couple of weeks, the St. Edward Eagle twins, Deontay and Devontae Armstrong, and also Mark Nave have all committed to Ohio State. And so, you got these skill position guys, right? But if you don't have time to get them the ball, or if you don't have holes in the offensive line for the guys to run through, it doesn't really matter much. And I think it's nice to see that, now that Justin Fry has been in Columbus here for a little bit, I think there are a lot of people that liked Coach Stud, but were ready to see what could happen and how that part of the team could be improved. I thought last year the offensive line played well, and now Justin Fry is proving that, hey, I can bring in some really high-end guys too.
And early and local, right? Some of the key points it's like there's always a counter, right? When Ohio State is rolling, it's recruiting so well nationally that locally, I would imagine there's a little bit of a, hey, what about the Ohio kids? What about the Midwestern kids? And look at this recent run of pledges outside of Peoples. It's the Armstrong twins, as you mentioned, from Lakewood St. Edward. Nave is in state as well. And then Moore and Graham are from Indiana. So all in that Midwestern classic conventional Big Ten footprint. But yeah, on top of that, you've basically built the foundation of an offensive line with 4 commitments to date. The Armstrong twins could theoretically be your bookend tackles. And I think both Ian Moore and Nave have a lot of interior ability, potentially some center stuff in their game as well. And we know the Buckeyes are coveting a few more offensive linemen there along the way. So you've got to bring in beef every single cycle. And Fry is doing some closing earlier in the cycle than most, to the point where you're like, hey, without even looking very deeply, Ohio State's probably got the biggest and best O-line group already established in this class of 2024. And size isn't an issue with this group. They all go 6'5" or better, all around that 300-pound mark as well, but not too heavy to where you got to shed weight on them once they do get to Columbus for good. So about as ideal a start at any position as you could have expected. It's just not as sexy and glamorous as 5-star receivers running around.
Sure it is. Hey, let's kind of wrap up by projecting forward a little bit. Obviously, there's a big commitment date on Saturday that I know Ohio State fans are watching. But even beyond that, what are we supposed to be watching here?
Well, yeah, all eyes are on Aaron Nolan. There's no doubt after last weekend, kind of the long anticipated scholarship offer that everyone knew was kind of already there was extended in person during a 2-day visit up to Columbus for the Georgia state champion quarterback, who's a lefty, by the way. That could be interesting in years to come should he select the Buckeyes. But yeah, he got the offer in hand. Ohio State was the last visit, and he had already set an April 8th verbal commitment date going into that trip to Columbus. I think reemphasizing the fact that the scholarship offer from Ryan Day and company was to be expected. His camp certainly did. Family was there. His former high school teammate, Jelani Thurman, who's on campus, was certainly waving the scarlet and gray flag there as well. So I think there's a lot of anticipation with Nolan. And even since the Peoples and Mylan Graham verbal commitments, you've seen the Ohio State group kind of say, we're building up, but all eyes are kind of on you. I think Ian Moore's tweet on Tuesday night after Graham committed was, all these receivers and linemen, all we need is our quarterback. And he tagged Aaron Nolan, and Jeremiah Smith was telling him to come on home as well. So a lot of internal buzz for Nolan to be that guy. But look, this isn't a walk in the park for Ohio State at quarterback, right? We know Clemson, Alabama, Texas A&M, Miami, Arkansas, a lot of schools have prioritized Nolan for a very long time. Yet and still, Ohio State was certainly a program he had to get to before his verbal commitment date. And obviously he got the offer in person, which to me, BG, it hits different, right? I mean, you've got a bunch of scholarship offers. You're a state champion. You're a top 100 recruit, all of these things that bring hype and buzz and all of that. But when a college football playoff type coach tells you in person, hey, I want you to be the next face of this program while you're there. I mean, I just think from a human perspective, as a 17-year-old, that's got to hit a little bit different. So I think the timing there for Ohio State is going to be really critical leading up to this decision. And I expect Ohio State to be the pick after checking with some sources, both before and after that scholarship offer went out. And with what happened in the class of 2023 for Ohio State at quarterback with the Brock Glenn commitment, decommitment, and then in 24 with Raiola decommitting in December, this staff wants to be done at the position as early as possible. So it's great to have momentum and bring in a bunch of verbal commitments, but when you're doing so at premium positions and or filling needs and headaches even along the way, it does feel like a bigger priority for this coaching staff. So I think the timing of this run would be fitting to have the QB1 of the future potentially right in the fold in the middle of said run. But it's certainly not going to be the end, at least for what we expect for Ohio State on the trail. There's other running backs out there. The secondary is starting to heat up from a recruiting perspective. The number one recruit in the country, Dylan Stewart, just set his official visit to Ohio State for June. He took an unofficial in March and said it was eye-opening. So the Buckeyes have captured some momentum there with another Larry Johnson recruit. So this is going to apex in a big way between now and those June official visits. And I think the Ohio State class is going to start to contend for the top spot in the country ahead of the 2023 season. And again, that's about as ideal as any coaching staff could hope for.
I always know that this is a fun time of year because there's so much hope around what the next season could hold. And the reality is you're kind of just about exactly halfway through the off season, if you want to think about it that way, from where you were in early January to the fact that camp starts, in basically 4 months. You're close to that halfway point. And I think there's a lot of people that are still feeling the sting a little bit of what happened down in Atlanta.
Sure.
It's going to hurt for a little while, but there's always optimism around what's to come with Ohio State football when they start pulling in guys like they have here recently. John Garcia Jr., with all the latest, as he always has it, over on BuckeyesNow.com. Check it out. We've got a daily recruiting tracker up, so every single day we'll put up some new news, whether it's different rumors about guys that might be interested, anything from that to actual planned visits to, of course, commitments and all the analysis once guys do actually commit. we've certainly got you covered with all the latest recruiting news. BuckeyesNow.com. All right, for John Garcia Jr., I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks for hanging with us on our Building the Buckeyes episode of the Buckeye Breakdown podcast. We'll see you again real soon as Ohio State gets ready for the spring game in just a week and a half.